and show him the gauge cluster. With the door opened, there was very little room beside the side of the car and the garage wall. After turning on the car, he pulled a large hunting knife out of his pocket into my neck. I immediately grabbed his wrist and slammed him back into the wall. At this point, we are wrestling between the car and wall as I try to get the knife away from him. During this 30-second period, it seems like an absolute miracle that I was not stabbed. The blade grazed past my stomach multiple times. I was eventually able to grab the knife and force him out of the driveway. Immediately after grabbing the knife, he starts saying, "What are you doing? I was just trying to show you my knife," and acting like I had just assaulted him. I was in such a state of shock that I actually started to believe him and wondered if I had overreacted. I know this seems ridiculous, but I was completely delusional at the time and did not know what his intentions were. I stood in the driveway, hands shaking, with 911 dialed on my phone, but did not make the call. He acted like nothing had just happened and started asking me questions, really suspicious questions like, "Do you have a security system?" I lied and said yes. I asked him to go home multiple times and eventually went back inside the house, but did not shut the main garage door. At this point, I needed to drive into work and started getting ready, showering, getting dressed, etc. I assumed my neighbor had just walked back home. After getting ready, I went outside and walked around the house to the garage with a can of bear mace. I searched around the garage and was worried he was still there. As I started to get into my car and leave, I saw my neighbor laying down behind some boxes in the garage, staring at me. I yelled and ran as fast as I could back to the front door and called the cops. Cops arrived quickly and my neighbor had disappeared at this point. They searched around his house and mine but could not find him. They said they would stay in the area but were going to leave for now. My house is surrounded by woods and I have a large back porch. Frightened, I stood in the middle of the porch while holding bear mace. I looked around and noticed my neighbor hiding in the woods, staring at me. I ran back inside and called the cops. They quickly arrived back and pulled guns on my neighbor and arrested him. He later said I was just trying to scare him. They found the knife, zip ties, vodka, and a note on him that read, "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." It was later discovered that the Coke bottle he wanted me to drink contained pesticides. He was there to murder me or my wife. He was charged with 3 felony counts and is currently awaiting trial. Creepy. This one is called Obsessed Neighbor by Alana Has No Life. I, 21 female at the time, and my husband, but then boyfriend, 22 male at the time, and I moved into our downstairs apartment. We loved it. was anytime we did something wrong in his mind, he would slam his door open and closed for 10 minutes, shaking our whole apartment. The night before I was flying out for our wedding, we spent the whole day at work and then we went to a diner for a late night meal, just trying to have a nice night as our last night together as fiancés. We come home and I'm having an anxiety attack about if I packed everything. My fiance is at the passenger side door trying to talk to me through my anxiety attack when our neighbor comes flying down the stairs yelling at us. Something about how we made noise all day and he could not believe that we are so inconsiderate of him. My fiance yells at him to F off as he's trying to protect me. Once we get inside, my fiance goes upstairs to talk to him. We figure out it's the cat tree, and every time our cat jumps on it, it hits the wall. Okay, easy enough. We move the cat tree from the wall, or so we think. We return from our honeymoon and we think everything is good. My husband tries to befriend the neighbor as they both play online games, and my husband asks if instead of slamming the door, could he message us to discuss when he has any kind of issue. He agrees, but that doesn't happen. I decide to call the apartment complex to let them know what happened, and they're understanding and say, okay, let's reach out to the property managers, who are the other upstairs apartment. The husband of the property manager team basically tells us we are making everything up because he would know if his neighbor was slamming the door for 10 minutes straight and to stop making waves. It's now the end of 2021 and they had moved in 2020. And I have spent my time in this apartment in fear every single day. Rent was dirt cheap, like $600 for a one-bedroom, so we were gonna tough it out. My husband gets told that he got a promotion and we're moving to the East Coast. We are so excited. So he leaves and I finish packing up the apartment. I try to be the perfect neighbor now that my husband is gone. I use my earphones for everything and anything. I close stuff very slowly. I do not want to make any waves. It's now a week before I start the drive across country. My friend and people from my husband's work are helping load up our U-Haul box for the day. After that, my friend and I decided to go into town for the rest of the day since my apartment is empty besides a bed on the ground. I drop her off at her house and then get home at 6 p.m. I decide to put in my earphones and vacuum. After I vacuum, I take out the trash and lock the front door as I was going to lay down and watch TikToks. My husband was always on my case because I would often forget to lock the front door. I lay down with my earphones in and watch TikToks for maybe 20 minutes when I hear someone at my front door pounding on it. I know that voice. It's my upstairs neighbor. My dog is trying to crawl into my skin. Meanwhile, my male cat is at the window hissing at him. He is pounding on my windows now and yelling that he's gonna kill me. I call my mom, who is 4 states away, and she tells me to call 911 and not her. Duh, like why would she call her mom? Why wouldn't she call 911 in the first place? But anyways, I'm texting my husband and another friend. I'm whispering to 911 that my upstairs neighbor is at my door threatening me. I then hear him trying to open up my front door. Since it's a small town, the cops are there very quickly. They take him away and I'm left in my living room with 2 cops. I can't speak. I just keep asking if he's gone. They assure me he's going to jail for the night. My friend, who lived an hour away, had loaded up her husband in the car and drove to my apartment to get me. Mom and I start the drive to the East Coast early as I wanted to close that chapter, and I wasn't sleeping with the nightmares. We're in the middle of the Midwest when someone from the hospital he was committed at calls me to tell me they released him, but that I needed to call the cops for an order of protection because he was still threatening my life. I said I was halfway across the country, so he can't get me now. They said that was for the best given his hatred towards me. We never found out what the final straw was, if it was me vacuuming at 6 p.m., but I never not locked the front door now. I couldn't be left alone for months. I was constantly checking to see if he had found where we moved to. In 2023, we came to a plea agreement since he moved home to his parents in Alaska that if he got mental health help, that I would drop the charges. We now have a pit bull who is being trained to guard me at night so I can sleep, and I always lock the front door when I enter my apartment. Can I just say to anyone that doesn't lock their door, please lock your door all the time. I have some friends that don't. Like, I have one friend who never locks their front door, and that just blows my mind, because I just think even if it's only a 1 in a bazillion chance that somebody's gonna break into your house, why have a front door that's unlocked if it does happen? Why welcome them in? I don't, just be extra cautious, And I have a dog too, and she would bark like crazy, but yeah, lock your doors, please. Alright, so this one is by Sentinent DMT. Crystal is the username. I was 17 at the time. I was wicked sick one weekend, and my mother decided I needed to go to the hospital. She had been drinking all day as she was a terrible alcoholic. It turned out that I had strep throat, so they're typing out my discharge paperwork, and my mother approached the desk where the nurse was sitting. Clearly stinking of alcohol, the nurse told my mother that she wouldn't be allowed to drive me home because she was clearly intoxicated. This sent my mother into a drunken rage, swearing and threatening the nurse. The nurse told her if she left, the police would be called, but my mother grabbed me and hurried me into the car anyways. I started yelling at her about how irresponsible she is and how she is ruining her life with alcohol. This makes her more angry. We only live less than a mile away, but my mother has taken a different route than normal. When I ask why, she just says it's the long way and she doesn't want to get caught. As we're traveling down this dark main back road, she begins speeding like crazy. We were doing at least 90 miles per hour when she looks over at me with a blank face and says, "I'm sorry." She then pulled the e-brake and cut the wheel, sending us flying off the road. The next thing I remember is sitting in the front seat of a pickup truck with an EMT shining a flashlight in my eyes, asking who the president was. I responded that Bill Clinton was the president, as this was back in 2000. Apparently, she had crashed us into a huge rock at the end of someone's property directly on my side of the car. Apparently, I crawled over her and staggered to the door of the property to ask for help. They put us in different ambulances and we headed back to the hospital that we just left. Upon arrival, the nurse my mother fought with said, "I knew you'd be back." My mother, in a drunken, semi-conscious state, kept saying, "I'm sorry I tried to kill you. I love you," over and over again. She suffered several broken ribs, a broken collarbone, a broken nose, and cracked vertebrae. concussion and some cuts on my face from the door window, basically exploding on impact with the rock. She was sentenced to an alcohol program through the courts and some community service. She suffered severe depression, and 6 months after this, she took her own life in another car accident. She actually asked me if I wanted to go for a ride with her that night, and I told her, no, I'll see you when you get home. That was the last thing I ever said to her. That one's really sad. Okay, this one is by Dwarven Divination. I was in Thailand, heading back to my apartment from a popular corner of bars in Chiang Mai. I went down the same streets and alleys that I always did, cutting through the center of the city to the edge of the moat by RAM Hospital. I passed by the technical college and saw a group of guys hanging on the corner. I didn't think anything of it as I entered the final alley that would put me at the moat and my new apartment. 2 mopeds passed me and went into an alcove to my right, and as I passed it, they zoomed out and cut me off. 4 guys hopped off their bikes and one approached me and said, "Where are you going?" He then hit me in the face. As I think, did this mother effer really just punch me in the face? I look up and he has his arm up and holding something in a swinging motion. I did the only thing I could, which was put my arms up to protect my face and yell out. After several blows to my arm, I attempted to turn and run. But his buddies were there to stop me and kept cutting off my escape. After a couple minutes, it could have been less, it's all a bit of a mess of a memory. They all hopped on their bikes and dipped. I have no clue why, maybe it was my yelling. I then looked down at my arm. My left arm below the wrist was cut halfway through. One of my bones completely exposed, marrow and everything. My hand hanging uselessly at the end, and I immediately knew I was in deep shit even though I didn't feel a thing. I had minor medical training, so I took note that no arteries were severed, but I was bleeding profusely and needed help. I went to the guest house nearby and asked the attendant for help. Poor thing looked faint when she saw me. She got me in her car and took me to RAM Hospital, literally 100 yards away. Turns out, what the guy swung at me was actually a machete, according to the doctor. I thought it was a cane or rod of some sort. So that's my story. It's important for me to say I stayed in Thailand for a year after this event, shove the door shut and lock it. He tried to get in the bathroom but couldn't. He actually said at one point, "I'm leaving," and opened and closed the front door to try and lure me out. It was quiet for a while, but then I heard him breathing outside the door. He eventually left after a few hours, taking my money I had hidden in my bedroom, and called a relative telling them I'd been in a terrible accident and he needed a ride to the hospital. He ended up running when dropped off and was missing for a year. The most terrifying year of my life. His body was found by a fisherman at his favorite lake growing up. They found high levels of meth in his system and it appeared to be a suicide. Later, when investigating the home I was attacked in, they found hammers, duct tape, knives under my mom's mattress and said it looked like he very much intended to kill me. That's terrifying. Okay, this next one is by the Reddit user, "My blank feels like wood." My four-letter word that I'm not going to say feels like wood. I had this neighbor kid I used to play with who was a complete psycho. I was 4 or 5 and he was a year or 2 older than me. One day he convinced me to walk well beyond the distance that my parents allowed me to walk without an adult. He wanted to show me something, he said. We arrived at a small lake. He pointed at the water and said, "Look, there's tadpoles in there. Let's catch them. We don't have a net. You'll have to jump in and catch them with your hands." I told him I couldn't swim. He insisted. He told me he'd pull me up if I was drowning. I refused. He kept trying to convince me, but eventually gave up and said that I was a coward. A friend of my mom saw us on our way back, and my mom wasn't very happy about the situation when she found out. Fast forward to 11 years later. I transferred schools and ended up in the same class as him. I figured my childhood memory of him was just sort of an over-exaggeration and that he wasn't really that weird. We talked about childhood memories. He told me how one of our neighbors, who was a cop, had screamed at him for no reason because he was playing with his cat. I told him it was nice to see him have so many friends, and he responded, "Friends? They're not my friends. Effing kids. I only let them think I'm their friend," smiling the whole time. I figured he was joking. I later told my mom about having met him, and she went quiet. I told her that he seems to have turned out alright. Nothing more said. A couple of weeks later, I brought it up again, and she said, "As a mother, I'll never be able to trust that boy, and you shouldn't either." She went on to tell me how I was unable to sleep and cried a lot at night when I was a young kid. Reason being that he had told me he was planning to burn down our house Phoenix, Arizona was plagued by two serial killers. One was the Phoenix shooter, who ended up being a team of two guys randomly shooting people, and the other was the baseline killer, a rapist and murderer. Having two serial killers put the entire city on edge, and everyone was talking about it. I even saw articles in Time or Newsweek about the situation. So the fall 2006 semester had just started, and Phoenix is hot in August. It would get stuffy in my apartment, so I'd leave the window cracked a little bit so the morning air could come in. One morning, a strange sound woke me up. It was the crack of dawn, 4:45 a.m., and the sun was just barely coming in. It was the sound of someone lightly tapping on my window, and it seemed intentional. In my tired state, I figured it could be a bird or some branches or something trivial. Tap, tap, tap again, and then silence. After about 90 seconds of nothing, the tapping returned, and it was absolutely purposeful. I was positive it was a human producing that sound, but I thought it was my boyfriend, who thought it was cute to try to scare me. I decided I'd be a bit of a brat and make him wait, but I was also getting really angry. How dare he pull a prank when I'm trying to sleep? This is just like him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind about disturbing my sleep like this. Tap, tap, tap. At a certain point, I got up to get a glass of water, still being in the mindset of wanting to annoy my boyfriend, who thought this would be funny. But I saw some movement through the slit of the blinds, and I marched over and yanked the blinds open so I could see, and it was definitely not my boyfriend. I said very loudly, "What the fuck?" He sort of seemed taken aback by my anger, but only slightly. The man I saw will be with me forever, or more specifically, his eyes, and the feeling they gave me were insanely creepy. Honestly, words can't do justice to how terrifying his eyes were. They looked like black orbs with no white in them. Absolutely predatory. When I see pictures of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, that's exactly what he looked like. Even if you saw a picture of how they looked, it's different when you experience it in person. It totally floored me. Something about this man was profoundly wrong. He was crouched down like an umpire, but had on dark pants, a dark purple shirt, and a dark Nike hat. He had dark skin. I thought he was Hispanic, but later I found out he was a light-skinned African-American man. Anyways, after I yelled, "What the F?" at him, he whispers to me, "Can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? Can I talk to you?" If you want to know how insanely creepy that is to hear, just whisper that sentence out loud to yourself right now. It still sends chills down my spine when I think of how it sounded. Can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? Can I talk to you? His hands suddenly exactly like it did in the police sketches that were on billboards everywhere. The only problem is that those billboards showed him with dreadlocks, and the man at my window had no dreadlocks. I called the Phoenix police, and the detective I talked to agreed that it sounded like his MO. The suspect would say something to throw off his target, and then he'd blitz attack. The detective said that my angry response probably made me seem like too much of a hassle, and so he moved on. The only problem was that I thought the guy looked Hispanic, and the detective said many witnesses describe him as black. I thought they might want to come out and try for samples or surveillance video or something, but I didn't hear back from that detective. My parents freaked out. They got us knives, pepper spray, and put up signs. We had learned another tenant had complained that same morning. I never learned the details, but this idiot was apparently going around the complex trying to find a target. The apartment would not let us out of our lease, but they did allow us to move to a second-floor apartment right above our old unit. And on September 4th, 2006, they arrested Mark Godot. I think the detective didn't call me back because they were days away from arresting him. When I saw his mugshot, I was sick but also relieved. He was absolutely the guy outside my window. To me, he looked like he could be Hispanic, but you can judge for yourself if you Google it. He's on death row in Arizona now. His wife tried to mount a campaign to show that the police were framing him or something. On a personal level, it certainly would make for an interesting coincidence if this poor innocent man who they framed was also whispering like a creep and tapping on my window. Super creepy. I'm glad I don't live on the ground floor. Okay, so this next one is by It's Scatterday. It's Scatterday. I went on a third date with a guy I met online. Everything up to this point seemed totally normal. We had talked for months before actually meeting due to the pandemic, so at this point I'd known him for almost 6 months. After the date, I invited him over, and honestly, my intention was to sleep with him that night. But once we got upstairs, I just wasn't feeling it, and told him I wanted to wait. He agreed and said he thought he should go. I walked him to the door, but when I turned around, he pushed me up against the wall and started being really rough. I thought he was joking until he pulled me to the ground and pinned me down. Once I realized what was going on, I struggled and started to fight like hell. His eyes turned black, and I could tell he was enjoying seeing me so scared. I tried negotiating, begging, crying, fighting. He was like a robot on autopilot. At that point, to stop me from struggling, he just started to hit me as hard as he could in the face and head. I played dead until he stopped. He was so turned on by this years ago, I was leaving work to go to my last physiotherapy appointment because I had a back injury. I worked in the heart of downtown, but physio was on the north side of town, so the quickest way to get there was to use the train. As the stations were close to work and close to the physio office, so I would not need to take a bus. As I got into the train station, I heard that my train was coming, so I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, because if I missed this one, then I would have to wait 20 minutes for the next one. And that would have made me late for my appointment. I got down to the bottom of the stairs at the train platform and turned towards the tracks where my train was coming in. As I turned towards the track, I suddenly felt two hands on the back of my coat, pushing as hard as they could towards the tracks. With little to no time to process what was happening, all I was able to do was jump as best I could once I was at the ledge. I leapt as far as I could, making it all the way to the other side of the tracks and the wall just as the train came rushing into the station. It was such a close call that I leaped across the track, that as I leaped across the track, the train struck one of my feet. It just grazed me as I got across to watch the train come screeching to a stop in the station. Once the train was fully stopped, I stepped up on the coupler in between the train cars and back on the platform, where a group of other people were yelling, "He's right there," and pointing to the man who just tried to kill me. Filled with rage and a desire to remove his head from his shoulders, I started walking towards the man, who just sat down and tried to act like everything was fine. I thought to myself how I was going to end this fool for trying to do the same to me. As I got close to him, transit security appeared and stepped in between the man and I, and potentially stopped me from committing a terrible crime. I offered them $1,000 each if they just turned around for a minute so I could at least give the guy the hardest haymaker punch I could muster. But they said there were cameras everywhere and it was just not possible. They then informed me that as transit security, they were only able to subdue the man once he was arrested. And as there were no cops around, it would have to be a citizen's arrest, and I had to be the one to do it. In order to do so, I had to approach the man, tell him he is under citizen's arrest, then make physical contact of some sort. I did exactly as the security said, up to the point of making physical contact. When it got to that part, time froze and my mind ran the gauntlet of different scenarios about how I could possibly beat the piss out of this guy. But I was able to collect myself enough to realize that I'm allergic to going to jail. So I just put my arm on the sleeve of his coat. Immediately after doing this, transit security cuffed him. While waiting for the cops, I asked him why he did it, and his response was, George and Saddam told him he needed to do it, and that I was supposed to be his salvation. The security guards then searched him, and in his coat pocket he had written a letter to the president of China stating he needed more rice rations. The cops came and took him away shortly after. He was ordered to undergo a 30-day psychiatric evaluation. After that was done, he was found not able to be tried due to mental health issues. He was then freed back out into the public. I found out shortly after he was released that he had done this before. 3 years prior, a woman who was 6 months pregnant was waiting for her train when he pushed her on the tracks. She lost her baby 30-day psychiatric evaluation and was found not capable of being tried because he was crazy, and he was released. What a joke. What a joke is, right? Wow. If I was that woman who just lost my baby and I found out this man was released, let me tell you, I am not a violent person and I'm not a vengeful person, but in that situation, that makes my blood boil just thinking about it. I can't believe they let someone like that back out on the streets. Crazy. Okay, this is going to be the last one that I tell tonight, and this is by Otter von Biscat. And she says, this is my mom's story, not mine. When my mom was 16, her mother, my grandma, was murdered by a campus custodian after leaving a night class at a local community college. Obviously, my mom was devastated by losing a parent at such a young age. She made sure that if she was ever in a scenario where her life was on the line, she would know what to do. Flash forward to my mom in her early 20s working as a cocktail waitress. She was walking to her car after a shift late one night when she realized a man was following her. He threatened her with a weapon and forced her into his car. My mom, being the amazing woman that she is, immediately started keeping note of every little detail about what was going on. What sort of car they were in, how many miles on the speedometer, where they exited, the name of the motel he took her to, every little detail. From there, I have less details because it was the worst week of my mom's life, and she really does not like to talk about it. She was assaulted by this man countless times. In between, she would talk to this man and pretend that she was falling in love with him and that she understood his problems. He would spill details about his life to her that which she would make note of for later on. She learned his full name, his wife's full name, and that he lived by an army base nearby. Eventually, he became enamored with her and decided to set her free back in the restaurant parking lot where he took her. My mom immediately goes to the police and informs them of everything that had happened. They picked him up a few days later and discovered he had killed someone since letting my mom go. At his trial, his defense tried to use all